Alright guys, you see this problem here where the fuel gauge, as you back up the truck, is kind of just wobbling all over the place. Now this is a little bit different than the other problem that I did a couple of years ago. This kind of problem here is almost always going to be indicative of a fuel sender problem. So you can see how we're now way past the full mark as we stopped going in reverse. And now as we're in the driveway going back to the front, as we come back to a park position, it's just kind of sitting all the way past full, and then without even moving, it's cruising all the way back down to empty. So that's almost always an example of a bad fuel sender. So let me go show you how you can debug that. Now it's either the fuel sender or the fuel sender wiring, and we'll take a look at both. All right guys, so let's take a look at the service manual. This is a 98. It'll apply to 96 to 99 fairly equally. And I'm going to go in, this is the volume 1 of the 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the wiring schematic for the instrument cluster. Now, we can see here's our fuel gauge, and we've got a couple of tie-outs on this fuel gauge, but the one we're most interested in is if we follow this trace here, this is our purple wire source for what comes in from the fuel sender in the tank. And there's a little bit of a difference in the wiring between gas and diesel. So here you can see a single and dual tank gas layup. And you can have single and dual and diesel, and they're just not showing it on this one, but we'll see it on a more detailed view later. And so if we take a look at a more detailed view of that, and let's see, here we go. This is single fuel sender, single gasoline. I'll just flash that here for those of you that might be looking at this with a gas engine. The big difference between gas and diesel is the sender signal goes through the vehicle control module or the powertrain control module, whichever kind of term you want to use for that. And then here's what the schematic looks like for when you have dual tanks on gasoline. But this is the one we're after for this video, which is diesel. And we can see here now in the previous chart, they didn't show the difference between dual and single without dual, but they do on this detailed chart. And you see there's a lot more circuitry with dual tanks. There's still no PCM involved, no VCM, no kind of engine module at all. When you have dual tanks, though, you do have a fuel pump balance control module that's involved, and you have primary and secondary senders. Now, I'm not going to get into this because this is more complicated. You don't find this on the SUV bodies. This is something you'd find on pickups and chassis cabs, but I present it here in case you need it as a reference. But we're going to be going down this single path. Now, on diesel, it's real simple. This purple wire, it comes down to C104, and it ends up cruising all the way into the connection on top of the fuel sender that's at the tank. Then there is no fuel pump in a diesel. This description here is just a carryover from the gasoline. It's actually just the lift pump is what you have on a diesel. Your primary fuel pump is the lift pump under the frame rail on the driver's side by the driver's side door, and your secondary pump is the injection pump itself. And then this has a ground tie-out that goes over to G104, which we'll also take a look at and inspect to see if it's a problem with the grounding. But other than that, there's no junctions. It's a straight shot right up into the fuel sender. Now, in order to test this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at the instrument cluster, and we're going to pull the dash, we're going to pull the cluster off, and between these pictures here of all these connectors, this is what the cluster fits into. And what we're interested in on this whole setup is we're interested in the ground signal, and we're interested in the fuel gauge sensor signal that was purple, number 30. And again, to show you how you read this kind of stuff, if I flip back to the original picture, and we take a look at that original picture here with this fuel gauge up here, you can see there's your 30. And then there's your ground, 451. And then the other wiring that you have is 39, which is the power of the gauge. All right, so let's go back to the truck, and let's get started on pulling the dash off so that we can pull the instrument cluster. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our 451 circuit, which is the particular ground that services the fuel gauge, and we're going to take our 30 circuit, which is the particular signal wire that supplies the fuel gauge. And so number 4 and number 16. And what we're going to be doing on those is we're going to be looking at ohms. If we were to take a look at, let's see if I can find it real quickly here. Probably not. I'll show it to you in a little bit. When you go to test this gauge between these two wires, 16 and 4, you do it. This fuel gauge is simply responding to input from the sender, and the sender is really just nothing more than a potentiometer. And you're looking at 0 ohms when you've got an empty tank, 45 ohms when you got a half tank, and 90 ohms when you got a full tank, when you got an OEM sender, an AC Delco type sender. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to monitor this. And going forward and backward in the driveway, we should see very little fluctuation in this, just from the minor sloshing in the tank. If we see a great deal of fluctuation in this, then we've confirmed that it's the sender. So let's go do that. All right, guys, so in order to get started with this diagnostic, we first got to pull the dash shroud off so we can get the instrument cluster extracted. So just a small plastic trim tool, anything of this plastic type nature so you don't scratch or damage the plastic. It's getting kind of old at this stage. This is a 99, so, 21 years already. But anyway, just go all the way around on this. Sometimes it helps a little bit to pull this guy out so you can get underneath this bottom one. And once you get it where you can kind of pull this piece right here, and then you can kind of reach over with your hand and get by the high beam, low beam button. You turn the key so that you can put the gear shift all the way down, and you can pull the tilt lever so you can get the wheel out of the way, and that'll give you the clearance you need to get it the rest of the way off. Now, before it actually comes off, of course, you'll have to undo these electrical connectors in the back, and that's going to depend on, what you have. If you don't have four-wheel drive, you won't have what I got here. If you don't have the hatchback, you won't have this one, you won't have this one, right? So go ahead and reach back there and handle what you got. I'll give you a quick look at what these look like as I get it off, but obviously I can't show all the different combinations. So let me go ahead and get these connected, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, we've taken this shroud off here like I was suggesting, and then just to give you a kind of a quick look, most of these connectors are just the kind where you have to push in this guy here to get them to let go. This one here on the end, you need like a small flathead screwdriver. You can kind of get under here and prise up the little tab that's holding him. The hardest one, and the real pain, this is the kind of connector I really despise, is this guy here. And this guy here, this is a kind of connector where it's kind of like this, but it's got like this extra tab here. So you both got to squeeze down on it in order to clear, the normal ridge. Then I found you also have to get down here with a flathead screwdriver and give it a little bit of a twist to help get this little top piece to come out. That one typically takes the most amount of time. In fact, on some of my other trucks, I haven't done on this one, I just cut this thing off just to make it more of a conventional type of connector. But anyway, let's get going with what we need to do here. We next have to pull these 4 7mm bolts off so that we can extract the actual instrument cluster. And just so you don't drop any of these guys down, keep your hands right close to them as they come out. I even want to try to finish them by hand. They're pretty short. There's 2 on each side. I'm just going to go get the 2 on the left right now because they're easier to get. The 4th one that I'll get is down bundled behind all that wiring that we were just talking about. All right, they come out pretty quick. Let's do the 4th one now. So you just kind of lift all this harness stuff out of the way, and there's the last guy right there. This guy you can't really drop anywhere because he's going to fall down here if you drop it. All right, and with that, with those bolts out of the way, those 4 bolts out of the way, there's nothing else holding the actual instrument cluster. It just comes right out. It's just a matter of clearing these wires. Kind of what you kind of do is you kind of tilt the back top towards you, and then she'll come out. Now this connection I was talking about that we showed in the service manual is right here. And what this guy actually connects up to, Set this down out of the way. That guy actually connects to is up here. And so, all right, if we consult the service manual for how we would go about testing whether this sender has a problem, there's different sections for if it's always indicating empty for gas, and always indicating empty for diesel, and this kind of repeats for single and double tanks for both gas and diesel, because again, it's a little bit different like we saw in the schematic. There's no control module with diesel. But the key thing that we're interested in here, since we're trying to debug the diesel one, is this ohms range, so that we can use an ohm meter and make a determination that 0 ohms is empty and 90 ohms is full. And when we do a check like this, and we see this test asks us to make several other connections, and we're always trying to check for this range in particular. If we flip it over and we look at the always full example, it's the same thing. So this is what's key here. So we can go and make a measurement from the instrument cluster position without having to crawl all the way back there, and eliminate a lot of wiring as being, working or not, just by doing this kind of ohm meter test. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to be doing is hooking our multimeter up to, first setting on the ohm setting, and then we're going to hook it up with the ground line on the 451 pin and the red line from the meter on the 30 signal pin on this connector. But one of the things I want to point out to you is the orientation of the connector and the orientation of the service manual picture are not exactly the same. So when I look at this and you look at the picture in the service manual, you would think that the 16's on top and the 4's on top, but it's not. Or you might think that this is, inverted as a plug-in, but the actual location of 16 and 1 is on this bottom row. 16's here and 1 is here. Now you can validate that by kind of giving a pinch on either side of this connector, and it'll come out, and you can see that you've got a black wire here and you've got a purple wire here, right? Now another thing you could do to validate that is if we go back here for a second and we grab the cluster. If we take a look at the cluster, one of the things we'll see is a 16 here. It's numbered 1 and 16, and we're after 4 and 16. You can see the 16, you take this flexible circuit board trace, you route it over, it's coming into the top pin on the fuel gauge, right? Because your fuel gauge is right here. So 16 on this side, if I flipped it around and plugged it in, is on the bottom row, and it's going to be on the right when the gauges are facing us the way we normally do it. And again, that's going to end up being pin 16 here and pin 1, 2, 3, 4 here. So I just thought I'd point that out to you because it's not immediately intuitively obvious. I don't know why the service manual orients it that way, but it does. And so that means we take our meter and stick it up here. Hopefully you guys can see that. I take my leads, kind of route my hands through the steering wheel so I don't block your view. I'm going to go on pin 1, 2, 3, 4 and pin 16. And we were showing almost empty when we took the gauge off. And right now we're showing, it's kind of trying to still settle here, 28. And I see this is not a good sign, right? So I've got these leads pushed nice and tight, and this guy's kind of just fluctuating right while I'm sitting here. Now you should maybe fluctuate 1 or 2 ohms, but you shouldn't be fluctuating like big jumps like this. So I think what we're going to see is we hook this in more permanently and back up the vehicle, that's going to be jumping all over the place. And I'm already fairly well satisfied that the problem is with the sender, but we'll go ahead and do the rest of the test. Let me get set up to do the drive test with the multimeter and we'll come back. All right guys, we've got this meter hooked up. What you can see is I just wedged a solid strand jumper wire onto pin 4 and another one onto pin 16. I switched my meter to use some test clips instead of prongs, and I've connected them to those 2 wires. We're sitting here with the engine running and it's showing 0 ohms at the moment. So now we're going to back up and we're going to see what it does. And you see right now we're backing up and we're getting some fluctuations. And now if we go forward, so we're braking, we're going to stop here for a second, let it kind of stabilize. Hopefully you guys can see that. So we're reading like 12, 15, 17, 14, it's just jumping all over the place, and then back to 0. So yeah, we've got a sender problem because the vehicle's not moving, but when it does move, we get all kinds of spurious ohm readings, and it never settles down to a reading that reflects the actual value that would be indicative of the tank's contents that we should be seeing on the gauge. But if we go back to the front and we park again, I think we'll just see the same thing all over again. And again, we're just moving maybe 20 feet in the driveway here. So you can see already there, it's kind of fluctuating again. It's jumping all over the place. It's trying to home in on a number of different values that the sender's sending ohms-wise. And the meter's even having trouble zeroing in on it. And then eventually, nothing. All right, so let's go ahead and drop the tank and see what guys, there's going to be a couple of steps in dropping the tank on these SUV body styles. So first thing you're going to do is take the fuel cap off to let off any pressure. Then what we're seeing here underneath are the fill line and vent line to the tank. We're going to need to open up these spring clamps and remove these 2 rubber hoses off these metal pipe pieces that go up to where you normally fill up. Also, while you're down here, you're going to want to check this ground lead, make sure it's in good shape. I'm probably going to pull this one off because it looks a little corroded there. Again, these types of problems can also contribute to the behavior we saw. So we want to check these ground straps before we go through the trouble of pulling up the tank. I know I've checked the ones in the front before. I know this one is mostly just as a fuel safety item, but I'm going to check it anyway. I'm still pretty confident that we're doing the right thing by pulling the sender. All right, now we'll come back and film removing this, but I'm just trying to show you the pieces. So next, let's reposition the camera and we'll take a look at the tank itself. All right, guys, now we're seeing a view of the bolts we'll be working with on the tank. Now, this particular tank has a shield, a skid, off-road shield, a skid plate, whatever you want to call it like that. It was an option that you could get back on these SUVs. It's got 15mm bolts. There's 2 in each corner, 1 in the middle here on the side that's closest to the rear bumper trailer hitch. And then there are 4 just like it on the other side we'll take a look at in a minute. And then here we can see 1 of the 2 bolts that are holding the fuel tank strap. So what we're first going to do is going to remove this shield and drop that, and then we'll tackle removing these bolts to drop the tank. So you don't need anything to grab this shield. It's not too heavy. It's about 1/8 inch thick steel. So let's drop that, and then we'll go ahead and do the next piece. All right, guys, I'm going to try to see if I can get this off with a 8mm socket. These guys can get pretty rusty, but definitely wear eye protection here because you're going to have decades and decades of crud that have accumulated on both these spring clamps and the hose itself, of course. Just open this guy up. Yeah, got him off there. So he's opened up as far as he goes. Now, let's see if we can get the one up here. Same deal. Looks like no, because I can't get this in here with any kind of leverage. Well, maybe. Let me see if I can get it in from this angle here. Might have to just try to get a box end wrench on this one. All right. So with this guy, though, with at least the clamp done, we can try to get him to let go. Now, he's been on there for 21 years, so he's not going to come off without some persuasion. But you just got to keep twisting. Eventually, you can feel like he's going to let go. Like I see that right now. I can feel like he's letting go a little bit. But I feel like I want to have this one out of the way so I can get my hand all the way around it and give it a pull. So let me go get a box end wrench and try to get this guy off. All right, let's come in here with a 8mm box end wrench. This one here I notice is really corroded. So I might not even be able to get it off with this. Here he goes. You can see just tons and tons of crud. All right. Almost. Again, definitely have that safety goggle protection on when you're doing this kind of a thing, because you're going to be right underneath this. There's just no way to avoid not having something fall down. Okay, we got this guy loosened up enough. Now, I got another tool here that I was going to use to try and pull this small hose off a little bit. Let's see if we can put him to use. It's just a nylon-lined pair of pliers. Just hoping we can twist it without tearing anything, being that it's so old, because I really don't want to get involved with replacing any of these hoses. All right, yeah, so he's moving around. Now let's see if we can get him to let go. You don't have a whole lot of room in here, that's for sure. And of course, even with the thing removed, we're probably fighting just a little bit more of it. It's holding on to the little nub on the end of the metal, I would suspect. See if we can get this guy to open up anymore. Might be the end of it for him. Just a little bit more. Sometimes these guys, you know, they look loose, but then a little bit more is what you need to actually get the hose off. There we go. All right, this one's off. Now, you might have some fuel here because this is a fuel vent line, but you shouldn't have anything in great quantity. All right, let's go back to the main line now. One of the problems I got is it's like a bright sunny day today, and I've got sun bearing right in my face if I get away from this edge of the body panel, so makes it that much more fun. Yeah. I'm going to have to try and prise him off. I like to use plastic tools if I have to resort to that. Actually, you know, this guy still feels really tight on here, even though he won't turn anymore. I'm wondering if maybe he's just jammed up in here. Now, let me go get a different tool and try to get this hose off. All right, guys, all it turned out to be was this thing was pretty rusty, and I didn't have to do anything special. I just gave it a couple extra hard cranks with the box end wrench, and we got it to loosen up the rest of the way. So that should allow us to get over this little ridge. We're trying to clear basically the same little ridge on the end of the fill pipe that we have on the end of the vent pipe here. So hopefully with that, we can do it. Now, I might have to wait until we get the tank further down. I don't know. I think we can do it from here. There we go. All right. Okay. Now we'll go tackle those 15mm bolts that are holding the skid plate on. All right, guys, here's a view on the forward engine side, you know, the engine direction of this skid plate. You got two of these 15s on this side, and it's actually the third one is part of this center piece of metal. And then all the way over by where I've got the flashlight mounted is the fourth one. I really can't get the camera up here while I'm doing the wrenching, but these are the other four that you'll have to remove to drop this skid plate. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Guys, I'm just taking out the last of these bolts, these 15mm that are holding this shield on. And then you can see I've got the shield held by my transmission jack because that's actually the mechanism that I'm going to be using to lower the tank anyway. It's very, you know, usually I use this if you're going to take a transmission out, but it works just fine for this as well. Probably should have an extension on it for this guy, but try to keep it from hitting the metal, making a loud noise for you guys if you're using earbuds or something. But there we go. And now we've got this skid plate where we can work it out of the vehicle. And then what we've got left under here is there's a plastic, housing piece, and hopefully you can see it. There's one of our straps that's holding the main tank on. So that's the next thing we'll do. So I'm going to go extract this shield from here, and then we'll pop those two strap bolts out so we can lower the tank, where we can begin disconnecting the lines and the wiring connections to the sender. Go. All right, guys, you can see I've got the transmission jack in here, and I've got it snug up against the tank. The tank's actually sitting in one of these black nylon protectors. In the event you didn't have the skid plate, they at least put something on here. And I've already gotten this first strap loose, as you can see. And I'm about to loosen up the other one, these two 15 millimeters. So you're going to end up pulling these bolts all the way out so that you can remove the straps, and then the only thing holding the tank up will be the jack. I should point out, this tank is empty. There's probably, I don't know, maybe eight gallons in here, 10 tops. Each gallon's roughly 10 pounds. So, do the math. This particular tank's 42 gallons, so almost 450 pounds, which is right at the weight rating of this jack. I definitely wouldn't want to do that. So you're going to siphon it off if you are unsure of what's in it to get it as close to empty as you can. And again, I'm showing this on a Suburban, so it's very similar for a Tahoe or a Yukon or an Escalade. But if you have a pickup truck, I'll link a fuel tank swap I did a few years ago on a K1500 up in the top right, and you can see how to drop the tank on a pickup side saddle style tank as well. Just tank differences, and the rest of it that I'll show on the sender will be the same. All right, so I'm just going to continue pulling these bolts out, and we'll come back when I get them done. All right, guys, we got these bolts out. They're pretty long for safety reasons more than anything else. Here's our straps. Got them pulled off to the side. Going to need to get the tank lowered before I could actually pull it out of the little place in the frame that it fits into. And at this point, we're going to start lowering the tank. All right, so if you see something like what I just saw there, where it looks like it slides a little bit, it means you might not have it, completely centered. So you might want to put your hand back here as you lower it to kind of keep it level as it comes down. But this type of tool makes real quick work of this sort of thing. Now we're going to have to lower it enough where we can reach our hand up there and disconnect the connections to the sender, both the lines and the wiring harness itself. So I'm going to continue lowering this guy, and we'll come back when we get it all the way down. All right, guys, we've got the tank on the ground here. We've pulled the jack out so we get some more clearance up above, and I've got it on some 2x4s, but I'm actually going to take them off there. And you can see I'm able to lift this tank with one hand. So I'm going to revise my amount of remaining fuel at probably 5 gallons tops. All right, so now if we come up here on top, you can see what we're dealing with on a diesel sender. So we've got an electrical line that runs up and goes over that frame rail, and we're going to disconnect that next. I've also come over here, and you can see right around the inside of the frame rail, I've disconnected that 13 millimeter bolt that holds the two fuel lines against it to give myself a little bit more clearance. And then what we've got is just an inlet and an outlet fuel line. And there's no quick connect on these. We're just going to have to take them off with two fittings. So we're going to disconnect those two, and when we disconnect those two, we'll be able to pull the tank out and start working on taking this sending unit out and replacing it. So next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back on the other side and disconnect this electrical connection. So I'm going to show you that. Now, unlike a gas fuel module, it does not connect here. It connects up at the end of this wire. So we're going to go follow that, and I'll show you where it connects right up above there. All right, guys, here we are on the other side where that wire harness is coming up over this cross member, and then it comes right down here. And all we're going to need to do is come up here and lift and disconnect it, and we're done. All right, now let's go back. We'll pull it through, and we'll work on the guys. So now we'll pull that wire through, and now we'll go with this first fuel line. What I'm going to do is I got a 16 millimeter pipe type wrench on here, and then I just got a 20 millimeter box end on the main line. And these lines are very, very rusty. Whoops. Let's see if we can get this somewhere where I won't hit it, but you can still see what I'm doing. Let's try that. So hopefully I'll be able to get these broke apart without the whole thing crumbling on me. They are very, very rusty. No, he's on there good. Might have to do a little bit of PB blaster first. Let me try that. We'll come back. What I ended up doing is with the electrical connection disconnected, I was able to swing the tank just a little bit outboard, a little bit less awkward position. And I found that between a 20 and a 16, I was able to finally get this going. Now you notice I'm destroying like the pipe that goes to the sender, but who cares, right? We're just trying to salvage the line that goes to the lift pump. So this is coming off nice and good now. It's just really, really corroded from sitting here for 21 years. All right, that's one. Now we get the other one off, and we'll be able to bring it out. And then I can give you guys a close-up. But hopefully, let me see if I can put the light over here. You can see this is massively corroded. So it's just a fight. If you got something like this, I'd suggest you kind of pull it out where you can get a better leverage on it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the other one off, and then we'll take a closer look. All right, guys, we got this out. I put a couple of longer 2x4s so I could slide the tank out. This guy here was a real bear to let go, but he finally did. Just you can see right there a little bit of the level of corrosion, but I think I can salvage the fittings that are going on the frame rail and put the new sending unit on there. All right, the next bear is a little present from GM 21 years later. They put some sort of body caulk all over this guy, and so in order to get him off, I got to first get this stuff all off of here. As you get under here, you can see all nice shiny metal. They're going to put this kind of stuff on there. Been great if they put it on the fittings so it wouldn't rust it out. But not really sure what this is. I have never seen this kind of stuff on a vehicle before. Of course, it's the first time I'm doing this particular repair on the Suburban. But maybe they just don't do this on the pickup trucks. I don't know. But I've never seen them do this on any of the pickup trucks I've owned from the 90s. Anyway, I'm going to get all this off, and we'll come back when we get all this off, and we'll be ready to clean this up and try to extract this guy from the tank. All right, guys, you can see we're making pretty good progress getting this guy out of the tomb. Would also point out this is a VPG sender. It's unique to the Suburban. Only the Suburban with diesel use this particular sender. I'll roll the part numbers at the bottom, but I'll also roll the part numbers of the other diesel senders for the pickup trucks, the chassis cabs, and the Tahoe and Yukon, in case you have one of those. But this one's a unique experience because it's just for the Suburban. So maybe only the Suburbans had this kind of body caulk type material placed on here. So I got a little bit more to work off before I can actually try and undo the ring and get it extracted. So I'm going to keep going, and we'll come back when I try to pull it. All right, guys, I've vacuumed this off. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and remove this vent hose. This is just like how we released it when we first started the video, presuming I can get this same size socket on there. If not, I might have to just try to get it off with a screwdriver. These guys are going to be super corroded as well. Might have to get a larger blade one. Well, this is the size socket that worked below, but so much rust on it, I don't know if I can get it on there. There it goes. All right. It's interesting how we got all this corrosion on top of the fuel tank area. Concerns me enough that what I'm probably going to do is take the tank out of this plastic housing that it's sitting in and just inspect it all the way around before I bother putting a sender in a tank that might look like it's getting ready to go. There's a lot of surface rust here. This isn't, too bad. Could probably sand this off and put some anti-rust paint like POR 15 or something like that, but I haven't been able to see what the bottom looks like. So, see if I can get this off intact here. All right. So, we're almost set. Got a few more pieces of this embalming material that these guys put on here back in '99. I don't know why. I think one more vacuuming after getting this out from under here, and I'll be ready to try and see if I can get the ring to let go and we can pull this guy out. So let me go do that and we'll come back. All right, guys, let's see if we can get this ring off here, the lock. Hard for me to see exactly where it pops out here with all this rust, but I think think what I'm doing here is the correct way. There's a little snap ring piece here. And I think this guy spins off lefty-loosey. We'll see. Still finding a lot of this caulk crud in here that I don't want to fall in. So there's a little stop that hits here, and we have gotten it to move away from there. So I think this is the right way. All right, guys, we're just going to keep pounding this along until we get it lined up so we can extract it. Now, once we get the kind of like these ridged pieces lined up with these open areas, then we can extract our sender. Just want to be careful we don't drop anything in there. All right, there's our float. There, we've got it all out. So what goes bad on these guys is right here. When the float's moving through up and down here, that's the potentiometer piece I was mentioning earlier in the video. And this is what sends you your 0 ohms for empty, your 45 for half, and your 90 ohms when it's full. And when that goes, you start getting either the wrong readings or sporadic readings, like we're seeing. So let me show you what I've got to replace it, and then we'll go about reinstalling it. All right, guys, before you swap out the sender, it's a good idea to take the plastic liner off and get any little rocks or anything that might be in there that could end up rubbing a hole in the bottom. It's also a good idea to take these liners off, these insulators, and see what kind of damage you have underneath. Now, the other side was pretty much okay. That gray you see is what the fuel tank originally looked like from the factory. It was covered in this gray primer. But if we take a close look and we look at where the corrosion's been happening in between these grooves, we can see that as we put a wire wheel on this, it's very, very flaky, and here we actually have a hole in the tank. So rather than just replacing the sender now, I'm going to have to get a new tank for this as well. So sometimes that happens. It's been here for 21 years. It's not unreasonable to have to replace it now. I definitely, some people might say, well, it's okay. And maybe if you didn't have a long time left on the truck and you weren't going to keep it that long, you might let it go and just try to seal this up with some type of epoxy. But I'd prefer, since I'm planning on keeping the truck for a while, just to put a new Spectra tank on here. So we'll come back when we get that tank, and so we'll turn this into a new tank and a new fuel sender video. I'll see you when that comes in. All right, while we wait for that gas tank to arrive, guys, I decided let's go under here and see what other corrosion problems we have, since that was such a corroded fuel tank. So I'm looking at where the front liner met up against this frame cross member, and there's really nothing going on here. This is, fairly normal. We're actually still seeing the black paint from the frame here, so it's actually pretty pristine. We already looked at the strap bolts, but one of the things we're going to want to do is look at the strap ears, and I'm going to do that from the other side, but let's just continue with this side. If we look at the opposite end here, where the rear of the tank was, we can see there's a little bit of a different story here. So we see, a lot of this looks okay, but there's really some heavy corrosion here, really thick pitting, and this is probably the same spot that got the tank. And so what I'm going to need to do here is scrape and wire brush all this off, and then we'll coat it with some rust encapsulator paint to prevent it from getting any worse. Our nuts for our strap bolts look fine. They're normal surface corrosion, nothing to worry about for a vehicle that's 21 years old. When we take a look at our fuel lines, this is a different story, right? So these are really badly corroded. I might have let it go, except that when I take a look at the steel line itself, so I'll get up on top here where this bracket was, and we start going down to different parts of this, we can see that these lines themselves are pretty corroded. In fact, the brake line is even in worse shape. Fortunately, these lines are in sections. So you can see back here, there's another one of these retaining brackets. There's several of these running down the frame rail. They're held in by 13 millimeter bolts. We're going to pop those brackets out. We're going to pop these other connections out that we are not concerned with. And we're going to bring this out as a unit. And I don't think you can see it from here, but we'll go down underneath and film a little bit more. They're held in by a union, so it's only about, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 6 foot of this pipe comes out and gets replaced as a unit. I'm going to use genuine GM for that because it's still available. So let's go on the other side and see the rest of it before we get started. So here's a view a little bit further back, guys. So as you come back and follow the frame rail over the differential and down, you can see these 2 unions here that I've already sprayed with some PB Blaster. This is what we're going to be separating, and the replacement line will run from the union back to the flexible end. And then here's another view of these retaining brackets. You can see there's a harness in here, there's a brake line on here, there's another line on here, and our 2 fuel lines are underneath it. So we have to remove these in order to replace the whole thing. So there's one here, there's another one there. I showed you the one at the end. Right to the right of me, we don't need to worry about this one, but it's conveniently here, and it'll give you a better view of what we're talking about. This is what's on these retaining brackets. So you've got a 13 millimeter bolt. That's all it's holding it to the frame. What I do is PB blast the other side because the threads extend to where you can see them on the outboard side of the frame. And then we'll be using a tool to press in. If you come in at the side here, you can see there's kind of like a little flexible piece of plastic. And when you push the pipe in, or the fuel line in, or the wiring harness in, whatever it is, it gets kind of pinned and retained under that. So we'll be using a plastic tool to squeeze that in so we can remove this. So we'll get this line off, we'll get this harness off, and we'll get this brake line off, and then when we pull this bracket off, it's just pushing the lines against the frame. So we'll be able to remove them as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started on that. I'm not going to show all of these, but I'll show the last one just so you get the hang of how to pop this out. All right, guys, and then before we do this line bracket removal, I did say we wanted to take a look at the ears on the tops of these straps just to make sure they're okay. And all you got to do is get like a mirror like I've got here. You just want to see that you don't have really deep corrosion. You got both the ears. You don't want to see anything here other than minor cosmetic corrosion. And that's the case I've got on both of these. So our straps are good. We don't have to worry about that. So we're just going to focus on pulling these fuel lines. And we'll get started on that. All right, guys, let me show you getting this one off. So I'm using a couple of trim tools for this task. For this big harness, I'm just going to wedge these guys in like this. And with that like that, I should be able to pull this out like that. And then what I'm going to do on this top one, I've got just like another type of trim tool, but it's like a thick wedge type tool. And what I'm looking to do is kind of bend these guys in so I can pull this line out. Try not to cut you off on the light. Almost. Just got to be patient with it, because it's really going to want to hold on. And there, that's out. And then we're going to do the same technique with the brake line. This one is not actually going to move very far because it's under tension. You just want to get it to let go of this actual guy. Actually, I'm going to have to reposition myself to get that one. I can't really reach in there, so let me see if I can take a different position where you guys can see. All right, guys, let me see if I can still film this and do this. It's really awkward. When you get under here to do it, you'll see what I'm talking about, to try and, you know, keep enough clearance over here where you guys can see through here while I try to do this. But if you focus on this area right here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to use this tool to spread these ears apart. And then we're just trying to lift this pipe out. Right? That's all we're trying to do. Now when I did the other ones, you don't just pop right out because I was in a better position, but we can see that we're kind of almost getting it here. There it goes. All right. That's really as far as this guy is going to move, because he's held in by the tension of this brake line, you know, going all the way over here. And if I can find what I did with my 13, here we go. The next thing you do, of course, is just go in here and remove the bolt. And again, like I said, I recommend you put some PB Blaster ahead of time on these things. Make them a little easier to come out. And definitely safety goggles. There's dirt and falling rust fragments and even little stones all over the place under here, at least in my experience. Alright, but this is the last of those brackets. And now with this guy out, we'll turn our attention to the union. So let me get repositioned and get a drain pan, and we'll pull that. Alright, let's get this piece disconnected. The sections you buy will come up through this union. So we just need to disconnect here and here. And you can see, you know, that's about as much as the brake line's going to move in that little bracket, but you set this wrench down aside a second. You know, it's still enough that you can, you know, work it over like that as part of getting it out. And it's held in on the bottom as well. The fuel lines have a similar kind of catch on the bottom, but we're not going to be able to, you know, get those out until we can get this out of the way and twist it. So let's go ahead and do this. Have a catch pan ready. And what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be using a 19 millimeter. Now, 19 fits really nice on the top, but there's a lot of corrosion on the bottom, so it doesn't fit as smoothly on the bottom. And then I'm using a 16. And just like when we tried to do this on the fuel sender, it's probably going to be really, really uncooperative. I hope you guys can see okay. I try to get some leverage. There we go. All right. Not as bad as I thought. And again, you know, have your pan and your rags handy. Now, I'm not going to pull this out all the way until I do the one on top. Just a flare wrench makes this so much easier. All right. And that was it giving way. So it wasn't as bad as the senders. Of course, the corrosion up here is not as bad as it was on the back, and the only reason we're replacing this is because the end of this line was pretty corroded. And we shouldn't have any pressure in here because, of course, we don't have a sender connected. But it will be fuel dripping out. And then what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to take this all the way. What I'm going to do before I finish disconnecting this all the way is I'm going to pop out. I'm going to get some end fittings for these, some screw-on caps rather for these end fittings, so I can screw them on there, keep some critters from crawling up in there while we're working on these lines. So I'm going to go ahead and keep loosening these up, and we'll come back when I'm ready to show you that. All right, guys, we've got these lines capped off. Just want to keep cleaning up any spilled diesel. And the next thing we're going to be doing, this frame bracket that we loosened up before, we're going to kind of twist it around like that, and we're going to need to pop these lines out from underneath. So I'm going to be repositioning myself to do that for this one and the one that's further up. I'm only going to show one of them like last time, so let me get going and we'll come back for that. All right, guys, so you're going to get this bracket kind of like this, and then get your tool in here, give it a twist. Might be easier to do this last one first. There's a lot of slack in it since I took the other one off. Trying to twist it all the way around so I can see it a little better. Really awkward angle too, but just kind of keep working it like this, just like we did the lines earlier. Eventually we'll be able to get it to pop out. I might have to reposition this camera again. So we've almost got this one out. It's just a really tight fit on these fuel lines. There we go. That's one. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other one. So I won't necessarily show that because it's a really awkward angle, but you guys get the point. You just have to work these guys out. You definitely don't want to break these brackets because they're not sold anymore. All right, so we'll come back after I get this out and then we'll pull the lines. All right, guys, on the back, it's kind of a similar thing. You can pop this bracket off. That piece actually was already ready to come off. This one's a little bit more flexible than the black kind. You can usually get it out with just your hands. And now we're ready to start working these lines through. So here's the first one. I can't remember if this is the feed or the return. All right, so that one's out. And now we'll get the second one. And that one's out. So it's really not that big of a deal for these sectionals. And I'll go ahead and show you the new ones. And I'll show you how you can get the bends in them. All right, guys, you see we got our old lines and our new replacement lines from GM. And we got both our feed and our return lines. The part number for the two, it's 157-22220 and 157-22276. And you can see the difference here right as we come in. So you've got, these are plated. You can see how bad the corrosion was, that it ate right through the plating on this end too, the fitting, where the rubber's crimped on. So we definitely are doing the right thing by replacing these guys. The back part isn't so bad. It's just that the level of corrosion we've got here, where you can actually feel pitting into the pipe, and then you actually got flaking pitting coming off this fitting. Since we're in here already and we got the gas tank out of the way, it's the right thing to do just to replace it. So at this point, I'm going to transfer these pieces that we put on to stop the leaks. And any fuel that's trapped in there, I'll fish that out. We'll put them on this side to keep any crud and dirt out as we push these guys through the frame rail. I'm not going to necessarily show pushing these guys back through the frame rail, but after I get them in, we'll show reinstalling those frame brackets. Be careful of checking the bends. You can see like each of these have a particular bend to them. There's a little curve here that you want to make sure, and it comes pre-bent from GM or AC Delco, but what you'll find is the shippers have to bend them to fit the box for shipping, and they tend to do the bend right here and here. So you'll need to have a pipe tool handy to get a nice bend back the way it's supposed to be without getting a kink in the line. And then of course you've got a pre-bend here on the end on both of these as well. So I'll get that back on and we'll take a look at it. All right, guys, we've got our unions hooked up on our new lines, and we've got our bracket back on the frame. I was not able to locate a torque value for this guy, so my suggestion is just to get it snug. You know, not over tighten it so you don't crack the plastic, but snug enough so it's nice and firm up against the frame rail like it was when you took it off. So I've got both these brackets, these black ones here in the back and the green one back near the tank, and I've capped off the ends, and we're all set now waiting for our new tank. We got the new tank in. Took about a week to get here. I ended up getting a Spectra Premium, and there's the part number down here on the box that came in. It's a GM43B. The tank for the diesel Suburban is unique to the diesel Suburban. It's not used in any other vehicle. So this is a 42-gallon diesel tank. You notice there's no vent holes or anything on it. The only orifices in the whole thing is the filler tube and then the opening where we're going to install the sending unit. So I've already gone over it and made sure that it's in good shape arriving. I've gone ahead and cleaned out and put it back in the plastic liner. And the next thing we're going to do is install the O-ring kit that it comes with. There's a seal. So we get this little package with the new tanks, and it'll come with a new locking ring, and it'll come with a new seal that fits in right here. The thing I want to point out, though, you know, it's almost impossible to find an OEM tank from GM on a vehicle this old, and you will see some differences. If you look inside, and there's a lot of glare out here today, so I can't really show it, but you'll notice it when you look at your own. There's no baffle on any of these aftermarket tanks. There's a series of baffles on the OEM tank. That's the only real significant difference between the two. This means that if you let the thing get down really low, like to 1/8 of a tank, uphill, downhill, it's probably going to have a bearing on your fuel gauge moving because of that. If you look over here on this guy, you know, the top piece here that's made, and look down there, I don't know if you can see it, but you can kind of see what looks like little washers. Those are the attachments of the baffle plate inside the OEM tank. There's a couple of them holding that on. So that's the only real difference between the two. You know, this guy also has a seal that's kind of embedded in here. It's kind of squished up at the moment, but and then the next thing we'll do is we'll compare the sending units. So right here's the old sending unit that we took out, and the replacement sending unit. And again, it's unique to a diesel Suburban, and I went with Spectre on this as well, because it's, again, next to impossible to find an AC Delco one, though I will provide the part numbers. This is an FG12V sending unit for a diesel Suburban. That's the only thing it fits. And I'm happy to see that there was somebody making one of these aftermarket, considering I can't obtain the OEM one anymore. So when we look at this guy and compare him, just going to gently remove him from the bag here. Just be careful with our float assembly. Of course, he goes inside the hole there. All right. So one of the things we can see is when we look at the sock here, one of the other differences with OEM. So the sock on the OEM has a valve on it. In the event it were to get clogged up, that valve would keep the fuel flowing. And there's no such release valve on the aftermarket socks. None of the aftermarket ones have this. It's a similar limitation to the tanks not having a baffle plate. As a cost savings, they're not going to have that either. The other thing too is this sock on the OEM one was a metal pressed in piece, so you could replace it. But on the aftermarket one you can't. So you have to go with the one they provide. Other than that, it's basically the same. You got the particular end connector. It comes with the same harness and the same type of end connector. It's got the same feed and return, and it comes with the O-rings, and it's got the attachment for the vent hose that goes up through the filler tube. And then it has the same type of top that the lock ring holds onto as OEM. So not many differences, but in some sense, you know, that sock difference alone, you know, concerns me, but what choice do you have, right? This stuff has been discontinued from GM for a long, long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the rest of the packaging off of this and get it ready to install in the new tank. We'll get ready to put the seal in and the lock ring. And by the way, inside the box of the sending unit, you'll end up with a lock ring and seal, as well as a couple of O-rings included in the kit too. So you'll end up with some redundant parts if you end up having to get both of these. But if you're just getting the sender, like we started out to in this video, you would have got what you needed to put on the tank anyway, so you don't have to buy it separately. All right, so we'll come back after I get ready to assemble all these pieces. All right, guys, so we're getting ready to put this guy in. You want to make sure the sock is kind of at an angle. You'll find that your original one should be somewhat of that orientation as well. And then it's a little easier to get the locking ring on to start with. So the side with the writing is what's going to face up. So we'll run it through the harness, and then we'll run it over our metal pieces, and then we'll be able to install this guy. You want to be gentle with it, kind of guide it in. You want to kind of guide this in. Whoops, so hold on a second. Hold on a second. I meant to put our seal on here. Just set this guy down for a second. We got to get this guy in. And what I wanted to do on this guy is I just wanted to put a little motor oil on him. Now this seal for the aftermarket is different than the GM seal. I'll show you that after I get done here, but the GM seal won't work on this aftermarket tank. It's a different shape to it. All right, let me get that in there. Now we'll go back and do what we were trying to do before. So we'll get the float in first. We'll work the sock in. Just want to help it go underneath. Now when you bring it in here, it's going to be facing in the same direction as the vent pipe, but you can't go wrong because there's a couple of notched cutouts here that have to be lined up for it to be in the correct position. And then we're just going to get this guy lined up to go underneath each of these. So this locking ring is going to go under this tab, under this tab, and under this tab. And if we've got it in the right position, we should be able to start that by hand and then finish it the rest of the way with a small hammer and punch. This is the same way, if you recall, that we got it off. And then this guy has a stop on it right there. So once we hit the stop, we've got it locked into position, and we're ready to finish, or continue rather, our installation. So we're going to be able to go underneath. You see right in the background there, we've got our new lines hanging, ready to connect up to these. And what I'll do before we actually move the tank in that position, we'll go ahead and install our vent hose, and I got new GM clamps for that, and we'll install our filler hose, and I got new GM clamps for that. And then we'll position it over and get it hooked up and then raise it into position. The other thing I'm going to show you is we're going to reinstall our liners, and what I'm going to do to try and prevent the corrosion that attacked the original tank here. You notice the corrosion attacked on the recesses. And my theory of this is that the glue on these recesses, what you want to have is you want to have this water be able to run down. And I have a feeling that the liner originally was like a defect in the manufacturing. It sealed this up. So when we put the glue on, we're going to tape off these recesses so they don't get any glue, to allow the water to run straight through and not have what happened to the old one happen again. So let me get caught up with some of that assembly and we'll come back. Hey guys, I just realized this lock ring wasn't all the way in. This is not the place it's supposed to stop. I just realized it was caught on this. We want to bring it away from that. It's going to actually have to go past this. Hopefully keep that guy in there just long enough for me to show you what we need to do here. We need to get it to go, there we go. We need to go past this piece and then continue on the rest of the way. Now you can see there's a little raised edge here on each one. What we actually want it to do is go into that area. Probably should be using a bigger punch. And then once we get this over this little ridge, it'll kind of rest under that hump. And that's part of what holds it into position. There we go. Now we've got it where it's supposed to be. So what we could do is we could, maybe give it another knock on each side just to get it rest up against here, because it's a little catty corner. Like that. But at that point, what we want each of these against each of those little nubs. And then we'll have it locked into position and properly centered. Now maybe, I'm just guessing here, maybe the purpose of all that caulking that GM put in there was to keep this guy, from shifting or something of that nature. And, I don't know, maybe what I'll do, maybe that was the purpose of that. Maybe because if this guy was to slide, this ring was to slide, he might be able to get past that. I don't know. That's just my hypothesis of why that sealant was on there. I still don't think I want to bother putting that in there. But I might put a little something in each of these spaces just to account for that hypothesis. Anyway, I just meant to show you that because I just caught that was not actually fully seated. We're going to continue and come back with the other things. All right, guys, I did say I wanted to show you how the seal looks like on the original GM tank. So you can see this guy's got like these 3 tabs on him, and he's metal inside, right? Instead of just being a piece of rubber, there's metal inside here. So he can be bent and he'll hold his position. So that's why I would suggest you don't try to install one of these GM seals on an aftermarket tank. We can see it's roughly the same, but it's flat and it's not indented. And it's hard to tell. I'm trying to get some of this goo out of the way from that material they put on there, but it's not as deep of a crevice as the aftermarket. So in my view, the GM seals are not compatible with the aftermarket tanks. It's just a pro tip on that. All right, let's keep going. So we're on the last step here. We're going to put this liner back on. Like I said, I'm going to try and keep it from sticking in this section here. And the way I'm doing that is we're just going to take some painter's tape, just sticking it on here to the part that goes down as far as the liner does, roughly, that has the indentation. Just a little spot there, and then we'll do this guy here, same way. And the tank's got a lot of like oil on it to protect it from corrosion, so this is pretty much the only thing that sticks fairly decently. And then, like I said, I use Super 77 rather, for something like this. So we'll do our cover first. You want to put it on rather liberally. And then we can do up here, and then what we'll do to avoid going where we don't want to go. Then we just have to wait a few seconds for that to dry, and then we can start peeling our tape off, and we can put our two pieces together. As you can see over here, we've got the vent hose installed with a new GM clamp. We've got the filler hose installed also with a new GM clamp. And if we go on the other side, we can see how we have the liner on the back side already installed. So we're going to go ahead and then affix this guy on here as soon as I get these pieces of tape off. And then we'll be ready to slide them into position so that we can reattach the new inlet, the new feed and return lines. And we don't have to worry about which they are because they're unique sizes. All right. In my case, there's like a little notch here that helps me tell which side is up. And then we can just kind of line it up based on where we did our adhesive. Slide it out this way and then kind of peel it down over the side. And then we can use a rubber mallet. Get any big air bubbles out. And that's it. It's probably not too different than the original installation procedure, except that they glued down these creases. So hopefully that helps. All right, at this point our assembly is ready to put back in and hook up. So we'll get situated to do that and we'll come back. All right, guys, we've got the tank in position where we can get it connected to the lines. If you see over here on this side here, we've gotten the rust, we've treated the rust. I'll show you the two products that I use to treat that so that we don't have that problem ongoing. And then we've got our two lines, our inlet line and our return line, both connected and tightened up to the sending unit. Now, I'm going to show you on the other side the angle I've got this for this part of the job. This is the last part before we actually put the tank back on the jack and raise it into position. So let me take you on the other side. All right, guys, I wanted to show you a little bit about the products that we use to treat that rust underneath. So this first product is a rust converter rather than a rust encapsulator, and it's from Rust-Oleum. It's a spray. It's very easy to work with. The catch with a rust converter is it chemically converts the rust, so you don't want to remove a lot of it. If you take it down to bare metal, then you can't use this. It needs the oxidation there to have the chemical reaction. So you apply this on after you just remove some of the loose scale with a hand brush, and then you need to seal it off just like a primer. And for that, I just use some plain old Rust-Oleum flat enamel black. So you need to use both of these to do the job. If you just do this, it won't work out as well. It's going to act like a primer without a top coat. You need to have a base and a top coat, and that should fix the problem. All right, let's keep going. On this side, what we've got is we've got the tank. We've slid it underneath on a couple of 2x4s so we don't scratch anything up on the bottom, and it also makes it easier to slide. And then we've stuck one 2x4 of height up, so we take the tension off the lines until we get ready to put it on the jack. We take this out to connect the lines. At least for me, that worked out really well. And again, it was a 20 millimeter regular box end wrench and a 16 millimeter flare pipe wrench for the fitting. And we just tighten those up hand tight. There's no specific value on there because you can't get a torque wrench up in there anyway. So just make sure it's good and tight. And then after that, the next step we're going to do is I'm going to get a helper, and we're going to get the tank back on the jack and raise it into position. All right, guys, we've got the jack in here in position, and we've raised the tank back up where it sits. We've got one strap in here. I'm about to do the next one here. So you want to get these straps in to where they're going to sit in their natural position. You don't need to put the jack up any higher than that. And then you just want to line this guy up with the nut, and you have to kind of give it a push with your hand to get it started. once you feel like it's got itself threaded, you can get a little bit of a bite into it. Now you don't want to tighten it all up at first. We're actually going to move this around and make sure that we've got those liners in the right position and that we've got this guy level and sitting in its correct position, right? So you want the metal tank correctly sitting flush inside the plastic liner, and then you want the plastic liner sitting correctly within the two straps before you tighten and torque this down. And we're not even going to torque it down until we put 5 gallons of fuel back in it, again, because the weight of the fuel will help us get this in the right level position. And the last thing we'll do after we get this squared away is we'll go over and connect our fill and vent hoses, and then we'll be ready to put the fuel back in. So let me go ahead and get this tightened up a little bit more so we can just take out some of the slack. It's part of moving this around, get the jack out of the way, and we'll come back. All right, guys, we've got our hoses reconnected here, and we've got new clamps. I think I mentioned before I'd rattled off the part numbers. These new spring clamps on both ends of the filler hose are GM 123 38017. And these clamps on each end of the vent hose are 11609970. All right, the next step we got to do, we'd have needed to put the power lead for the sender up over that cross member before you lifted this up. We're going to go on the other side now and plug it in. All right, guys, we need to hook up the sender's electrical connector right above this cross member. Hopefully in this mirror view you can see the female. Here's the male end of the sender right here. And I'm going to try and do this where you can see it. I'm just going to plug it into this guy. Super awkward position, but you can see that's how it goes in. Hopefully that's coming through on the video okay for you. And we just want to push this in until it snaps. And then when it snaps, we're done. All right, let's continue with the next step. All right, guys, we're going to add maybe 2 gallons of diesel back from what we drained, just to give ourselves some weight on the tank so we can then test for any shifting. And then we'll go ahead and torque down the strap bolts. So let me go do this and we'll come back underneath. All right, guys, we're just tightening these straps up now that we've got everything kind of centered where we want. We're going to tighten these 2 strap bolts to 33 foot-pounds. And then after we finish this, we're going to go over and take those spring clamps to 25 inch-pounds. All right, so we got these guys at 33 foot-pounds. Going to do the clamps at 33 foot-pounds on these. And then I'm going to do the clamps at 25 inch-pounds, and then we'll put the rest of the fuel that we drained out of the original tank. And then the next thing we got to do is bleed the air out of the new lines. All right, guys, to bleed these lines is the same as when you're going to bleed from the fuel filter when you're going to change the fuel filter. So you're going to end up opening this guy here, this vent, and then you're going to end up closing it. And you got to remove the shroud with the 4 10mm bolts that's holding that in order to access this. If you got a 5/16 line, you can put it up on top here. I never can find one when I need it, so I just stick a cup with a hole in it, throw myself a little saran wrap thing on top, and it gets the job done. It isn't pretty, but it gets the job done. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open this guy up on the bottom, if I can get it coordinated right. Let me see if I can find another spot for this flashlight, because I can tell he is already not going to be cooperative. Maybe he'll be happier right there. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a helper turn the lift pump on. And then with the lift pump on, it'll pump all the air out. And hopefully, eventually, we'll see fuel come out of there. All right, there we go. We got some fuel coming out, and we got some air coming out. And as soon as we don't feel like we got any more air with the fuel, we can close it off. And yeah, this method is really messy, but it's good enough. And you see there's still some air percolating out there. I'll probably do this 2 or 3 times until I get clear fuel. Again, if you got a 5/16 hose, you can do that and run it into a bottle or a cup or something like that, but this is how we get the air out of the line. All right, guys, we fired this... we put the dash back together and we fired it up, and we're reading dead empty right now. And so I don't know if that's indicative of a little bit of a difference between this new sender and the old sender. The old sender we were reading, right above the reserve area. So we're going to back this forward and back a few times to see if we see any movement in the gauge. If not, I'm going to put another 5 gallons of fuel in here and see what we got. So at this point, when we did the first test at the beginning of this video, just backing up about 30 feet, hitting the brakes, we were seeing a lot of erratic movement in the gauge. Now we're not seeing anything. Going to go forward here a bit. Not seeing anything here either. So I think at this point we're going to add some more fuel and see if that gets us some more movement and whether or not we've actually got this fixed or not. I will point out that if you start the truck up before you've assembled the dash, and if you've got auto track, the switch down here for 4-wheel drive, if it's not connected when you start it up, you will get a service engine soon light. Don't worry about it. When you put everything back together and run it a couple of times, that'll go away. All right, let's add some more fuel and see if that helps us out. All right, guys, we put 5 more gallons in there, and the gauge definitely moved, so we know it's recording the fluid level in the tank. So we moved up from dead empty to right up to 1/8 of a tank there for 10 gallons. That sounds about right. So let me, maybe I would have expected it to be closer to the quarter mark, but I can't be sure. I don't know how much of a reserve buffer is in this particular tank, of 42-gallon tank, with where the gauge decides it's on reserve and then decides it's on empty. It never really gets bone dry. There's always some in there, even when you get all the way down to the E. But let's see if we got any erratic movement, because that was the whole point of this whole long gyrated thing. So I'm going to go back up again the driveway, just like we did that first time. I'm actually going to go further this time. I'm going to go all the way to the street here. I'm not seeing any movement. Get some light here maybe to help you guys. It's starting to get dark today. And I'm really not seeing any movement at all. I mean, I might see a tiny bit of movement, but again, I think that's probably more indicative of what we said earlier, that this aftermarket tank doesn't have a baffle in it. And we're sitting at such a low level that we're going to be subject to the movement of the fuel in the tank with not having a baffle in these aftermarket ones. But I'm just going to try back here again. I'm hitting the brake here. I see a little bit of a movement, but that is all baffle related. I mean, what we're not seeing is before we would see this thing jump up to half, to full. It was all over the place. When we had the ohm meter on it, we had all kinds of erratic readings. So I am satisfied that we probably have corrected this guy. I don't know that we'll know for sure until we go fill it up, but that's the next thing we're going to do, is we'll go ahead and fill it up, and we'll go ahead and see what that does when we get a full tank in there. So the only thing we have left to do is to put the shield back on, and I'm not going to do that until we fill it up and I can get a chance to check for leaks. So let's go ahead and fill it up and come back and do that. All right, guys, we've got the tank full, and we've put the shield back on. The 4 15mm bolts in the back and the 3 in the front, and we've gone ahead and torqued off all of those guys down, all 7 of them, to 26 foot-pounds. At this point, we don't need the jack anymore, so we can kind of wheel this guy out. And so you fill it up, you put the, you check for leaks, then you can put the off-road shield back on. And let's go ahead and take a look with the tank full, and I can show you that the problem is still fixed. All right, guys, just another pro tip. When I fill up the tank, I put 8 ounces of this Stanodyne Performance formula, this lubrosity additive, into the tank. I've been using this ever since I got the last injection pump put in, I don't know, around 2005 or 2006, and I'm still running on that same pump. So I'm a big believer in this. It was recommended to me by a Stanodyne engineer at some point, and I'm just passing the tip along to you guys. Let's go ahead and take a look at the gauge now. All right, guys, we've got this reading full. What I did is I took it over to the station, and I put it in there until it auto shut off, and then I just rounded it a little bit up. So we added 5 that we took out of the old tank. I put 5 more in so that we could confirm the sender was working. And then at the fuel station, I ended up adding another 35.6 gallons. So this rated 42-gallon tank actually ends up taking 45.6 gallons. And at that reading, it shows us just slightly more than full. So it's a little bit, over full, if you will. So we know that the reserve rating with this new sender represents 10 gallons. And we know that the max before you get an auto shut off at the pump is going to be taking it all up to just over 45. Now again, with all that, I can go all the way back in the driveway just like we did when we were showing just 1/8 of a tank, and I'm going back and I'm hitting the brakes as we go each time. And you know, at full, even without the baffle, we really don't have any movement at all. And I've driven this guy today, probably, you know, took me about 12 or 13 miles just to get to the station, the gas station. So we probably almost went down with the fuel mileage on this thing. We might have been, you know, shy of 9.5 gallons. So when the whole thing's said and done, you can just round this whole thing out to 45. So the problem is fixed, and it turned out to be a lot more than we thought it would be. So this started off just changing the fuel sender, changed the fuel tank, changed the fuel sender, and changed the fuel lines. But I hope it was useful to you guys. I got this truck back on the road, and it's all nice and reliable again as to knowing how much fuel is in it. If you found this procedure, had some comments on how this procedure might have been done differently if you were doing it, or even had some questions about what happened, go ahead and leave them down there in the comments and I'll try to help out. If you like these kind of videos, please hit that like button and communicate that back to me, and I'll do more content of the type that you guys are looking for when I'm recording something that I'm working on. And please remember to subscribe if you find this content useful. Thanks for watching.